All right, everybody, welcome back to Horn Takes. It's been a while, but we're finally back, and we finally got recruiting with Mike going again. We got Mike Roach, Horns 247 recruiting analyst and author of Road to Texas. Really cool book, 11 chapters, 11 really interesting recruiting stories about Texas Longhorns, how they ended up there, all kinds of good stuff in this book. So, Mike, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Real good, man. I bet you've been busy, real busy these last few weeks, huh?
It's been, it's even with Texas kind of being lower on this end of the class and not having as many guys, it's still been pretty busy and still trying to wrap up a ton of stuff before signing day.
I got you. Signing day is next week, right?
Yeah, next Wednesday, February 1st, I think.
Yep. So next Wednesday is the last time the 2023 guys can sign their letter of intent. Let's talk about the 2023 class we got right now. It's the number 3 class in most of the recruiting services. I think composite it's number 3, 15 top 300s, a couple of number 1 national guys, depending on which service you look at. Number 1 overall recruit, I think, depending on which service you look at. I know that stuff changes a lot. Talk to us about this class. It looked like Sark, he filled up on edge and linebacker, which I think were a couple of areas where we needed to get some more depth. What do you think about this 2023 class so far?
Yeah, for 2 years in a row, it seems like Steve Sarkisian's identified a major need and then went and filled that need. And in the 2022 class, it was offensive line, and he signed a massive offensive line group, and a couple of those guys played early and played real well. And in this class, it seemed to be linebacker and edge was what they were focused on quite a bit. And kind of like offensive line last year, you didn't really know how it was going to come together. It didn't seem like there were that many targets going their way early in the process, but that you get into the fall and you're able to flip a guy like Colton Vosick from Austin Westlake, who was committed to Oklahoma, who I think is a tremendous player. And then, you get a guy like Tassili Akana down the stretch. You get some talent there that can rush the passer and get after it. And then at the linebacker position, I mean, that would be, to me, their best job they did this year is what Jeff Choate did at linebacker, getting guys like Anthony Hill to flip late, going in with Darian Gillette and Leongali Fowl, Samaje Burrell. I mean, there are just names on names on names. And then getting a guy like Jelani McDonald at the end of the cycle, who is one of our big risers in the rankings this year. I mean, he's gone from relative unknown to, you know what? Our rankings release as we're recording this in about 40 minutes. So I think I could say this now because I don't think it'll be out by then.
It won't.
Gone to basically a top 50 prospect in the country along our rankings. So it's a tremendous group. And regardless of what you see Jelani as, he played cornerback at the All-American Bowl. He's played quarterback and safety. A lot of people think he's going to grow into a linebacker prospect, but he is one of those kind of versatile defenders that you can line up in a bunch of different spots.
Yeah, and the way you got to play defense in the Big 12, at least for sure, having those guys that can play multiple positions like that is can be really key to being able to disguise stuff and keep offenses off their toes. Now, you just named off like 10 guys. They're all edge and all linebacker guys. One place where I thought we needed some help, and I think from a numbers perspective, they didn't do as well, but I think they got some really good players, was in the secondary. Talk about the secondary class.
Yeah, I agree. I think in 22, they did take a lot of numbers at that position. And in this class, they took a lot of dudes at that position. When you look at Malik Muhammad on the corner, one of probably the best true corner in the state of Texas, out of South Oak Cliff High School. Derek Williams at safety, one of the best safety prospects in the country, out of New Iberia, Westgate in Louisiana. And, they were able to get some guys there. Getting Gavin Holmes in the transfer portal is going to be big. And even this weekend, they're going to take a swing at Warren Roberson, who's committed to TCU, but is officially visiting Austin weekend. So lower in numbers, but probably more measured shots. Now, they did miss on a few guys, and I think instead of pivoting to lesser prospects to fill numbers, they just said, hey, we're going to stand pat at that.
Yeah, a good segue into the next topic I wanted to bring up was the portal. Right now, they've had 4 guys in the portal that they've picked up, unless they've got somebody I don't know about lately. Jalen Catalon, safety guy out of Arkansas, was a really highly recruited guy out of high school, and a guy that a lot of Texas fans were kind of bummed went to Arkansas. And then Gavin Holmes, you mentioned him, both defensive backs. I believe Holmes is a cornerback, Catalan's a safety, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
so those are a couple of guys we think probably could step right in and contribute right off the bat. Ryan Sanborn, the punter out of Stanford, his average looked pretty good. Other than that, I haven't seen Stanford play a single snap of football since probably Christian McCaffrey was there. So I don't know much about that. And then I think the big one, and this one's an interesting story to me, and I want to talk a little bit about this one, is A.D. Mitchell out of Georgia. Now, there was a post on the 247 message board like on Christmas Eve last year where someone mentioned, I got a buddy, and he says this guy's going to, after the playoffs, he's going to portal to Texas. And everybody's kind of like, what? You know, why? How's that even a thing? How would anybody have known that or decided that or whatever? So talk to us about what went down with A.D. Mitchell that you know of.
There was certainly a lot of buzz behind it. It was a name we heard even before the transfer portal opened in mid-December. Hey, keep an eye out for this. And if he goes in, we think Texas is going to be a possible destination for him. He actually signed out of the state of Tennessee when he went to Georgia, but before he was in Tennessee, he was in the Houston area playing at Fort Bend Ridgepoint, and I believe still has a child in the area. And that was a big driver for him, was to get back home and be around his kid more. And you know, we had kind of forgot about it because the name was mentioned to us early on, and then nothing ever happened. And then about the last 2 weeks of this transfer portal window, we started to hear that buzz pick back up after the national championship game. So I think with AD Mitchell, he kind of gives you a lot of what Jalen Catalog gives you, right? Like he can play at an incredibly high level. His challenge has always been staying healthy, same as Catalan. So you look at those guys and you say, well, if they can stay healthy, you know, they give us a lot. I think that's the big question mark. But what they're able to do with the receiver position, adding a guy like Mitchell, adding more depth there, more high end talent. Yeah, I think they hope he gives you what they were hoping Ajayi Hall would give you when they took him last year.
Right. Yeah, this guy, I went and looked him up. You know, I don't watch a lot of UGA games that much either, but this guy was 14 yards per catch over 2 seasons, actually a little north of that. And I think he had 2 big touchdowns in the playoffs this year. I think he scored a touchdown last year in the national championship game. So this is a guy that he's done some stuff. And so I think, you know, based off of what you just said, it looks like, you know, maybe family reasons kind of are bringing him back to Texas. But yeah, that whole, I've seen a lot of crazy stuff, I think, in the transfer portal, but I don't think I've ever remember hearing a story like this where there was people already talking about his destination school well before the playoffs even started for a guy that is a 2-time defending national champion now. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, and I think that people see that and they think obviously tampering. And look, I think tampering goes on in all levels of college football in the portal. I think there's always somebody talking to somebody on behalf of a school or a recruit. But in this case, a lot of the buzz was from Mitchell's side, talking about wanting to get back to the state of Texas and knowing there was a fit for him there.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm assuming, I don't know, I haven't done this much research on him. He's got to be like an all SEC guy, right? Or actually, he was hurt most of this year, so he's probably not an all SEC.
So that's the deal, is like he's battled injuries, but when he's on the field, he's making plays. And I mean, you mentioned he's scored in every playoff game Georgia's played in their existence, basically, in the existence of the college football playoff. So yeah, just a tremendous, or I guess, I'm sorry, they were in there a few years ago before he was on campus, but every game that he's been on campus in the playoffs, he's scored in. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's turning in some big time performances at the right time. I think the key is keeping him healthy and keeping him on the field for a full year.
Yeah. So let's hope we can do that. Now, Gavin Holmes is an interesting one. He's a lesser known guy. Not a lot of people know much about him. Talk to us about him and what do you think about him and his ability to come in and contribute off the bat?
Yeah, originally from the state of Louisiana. So Texas had a tie there because Terry Joseph is so well respected in New Orleans, and he is a New Orleans kid. Went to Wake Forest, was a bit of a late bloomer. I remember seeing him in high school. He was a smallish, skinny prospect that I saw in a 7-on-7 tournament, and went to Wake Forest and bloomed. You know, he's not going to give you the eye-popping turnovers and all that sort of thing. The one thing he does is he just covers really well. You know, he's a really good, single cover guy. So they needed something like that to add cornerback depth. I think loved what they got out of Ryan Watts last season, out of the portal, and just adding some more depth there until those young guys can kind of get up to speed was a big priority.
Yeah, I think for this defense, filling out that secondary is definitely, we saw a huge improvement with the defensive line last year. Most of that I felt like was from the interior. I think the edge guys played better than they did the season before, but really a lot of that quarterback pressure came from the interior. And I thought if we can keep some guys, and we did, and we can fill out that edge, that gets us pretty solid in that front seven. We got Ford coming back, some really good prospects coming in, and some guys that have played a little bit who we need to improve, obviously, over the next few months. But really, that secondary was a spot where I just felt like if we can really get some dudes in there, this team can really flourish on defense. It improved greatly from year one to year two. If we can get that same type of improvement into going into year three, it's going to be a really tough defense. All these guys coming in, who do you think in this class are some guys that can play right away from this freshman recruiting class?
I mean, you have to look at the headliners first, and you'd be foolish not to bet on Anthony Hill as the odds-on favorite. Anthony Hill and Cedric Baxter, in my opinion, the two guys that are ready-made to go into a college program, play right away, both the positions need, running back and linebacker. And oh, by the way, both are on campus early in the spring, so they're going to get that jump ahead of the competition. I think both of those guys are automatics. I think Derek Williams plays early because I think there is a need at safety. I think you could see a couple of linebackers get in there early, depending on what the depth in the rotation looks like. Obviously, with Jalen Ford coming back, that's big. But they're going to have to find some answers there on the inside. And then at receiver, I love what Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore bring to the table. I think Jonte is probably the most ready-made wide receiver in this group. But DeAndre Moore also, gives you that explosive downfield threat as well. So those are a couple of guys I would look at.
Yeah, I think Hill looks like one of those guys you can just tell him to go line up here every time and just chase the football. And he's that athletic that he's going to find a way to get to the ball. I kind of would like to see him come off the edge a little bit. I think for me, that's where this Texas defense is just really got to get better for sure, is the pass rush off the edge. We had a few sacks off the edge last year early in the season, but not once we got into Big 12 play, it really just kind of turned into almost what it looked like last year. So I think, if I'm those guys, if I'm PK, I'm trying to find two guys that I know it's third and long. I could throw them out there, and they're fast enough and athletic enough to cause some havoc off the edge. I don't know. We'll see what happens there.
The guy I'll give you for that is Darian Gillette. Darian Gillette, who missed his entire senior season with a knee injury, and I to his signing ceremony, expecting to see like a big out of shape guy, because usually when you tear your ACL, you get out of shape. And so Gillette, who is a small school athlete who runs the 100 meters, 200 meters, 4x1 and 4x2 at his high school, and I saw him run at the state meets, runs anchor on those relay, by the way, is a tremendous basketball player. A lot of people had him pegged as an inside linebacker. Well, he showed up to Texas at about 235 already. And that's with torn ACL and no college strength program. So obviously that's a guy that's probably going to play closer to 250, 255. And he is a phenomenal athlete. I think if they can get his rehab's probably not going to be done. He's probably not going to be able to play spring football, but he's going to be able to start working out more soon. And I think if they can get him up to speed, he's a guy that can give you those quality snaps off the edge.
Good. Well, I'll be looking for that name come fall. Who's your gem in this class? Who's your kind of hidden guy? I'll tell you who he is for me. I like Trey Wisner. I liked his film. His tape looked really good to me. And then I watched him in that state championship game. And, man, he lit it up in that state championship game. And the crazy thing to me is he did it all from the slot. I mean, he had a couple of runs for some, pretty explosive plays, but almost all his damage came out of the slot and in the receiving game. I think that guy I think he could be a slot guy I think he could be a Keelan Robinson guy for Sark.
And I think that's what he will be. It was kind of evident throughout the year that DeSoto was phasing him more into that slot role. And that, that was where he was going to play more. And so I think he gives you the versatility. I like Trey a lot. I think my guy I would go with is probably Leon Galifau from Kahuku High School in Hawaii, the first Hawaiian prospect to sign with the Longhorns. You're talking about a little bit undersized, but one of the more instinctive linebackers you'll see on tape, and a guy that arrived in Austin in January just ready to work. I mean, the stuff I've heard since he's been on campus of him calling coaches and waking them up to see if they'll let him into the weight room early in the morning and all that sort of thing. Like I had heard in the first week he was on campus, he was dragging Arch Manning to the weight room. Like, come on, we got to go work out. So, I mean, this is a guy that is the Hawaiian kids have a little bit different mentality because they understand that football is their way in this world a
Right.
lot of times. And so he's got that workman-like mentality. He's got a lot of athleticism. And when you see him on tape, he reads and reacts better than just about anybody.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen much on him, but I think it's good to hear that you think he might be one of those guys. Linebacker has been a challenge. I think Texas really got lucky this year with Ford, just his development. And I don't know, surely he's got to have a lot to do with it. You can tell he knows what he's doing, and when he shows up in a bad way. Obviously, the coaching staff, Choate, has got some hands on that as well. But really, we need some more quality depth at the linebacker position. And we need some guys, quite frankly, that could just – I mean, Ford kind of did it last year, took over a lot of games. There was a few games in Big 12 play that Texas doesn't win if Ford doesn't do Ford stuff last year. So I'm hoping a lot of these other guys will come in and could start emulating some of that. As we said at the beginning of the show, 2023, it's about wrapped up. There's a couple of guys, though, and maybe one of them is gone now, but at least a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of talk about this guy. And you mentioned the other one earlier. We got Deuce Robinson and Warren Roberson. Talk to us about those two guys. I know you talked a little bit about Warren Roberson. What are some chances here? If you had to put some percentage chances on them, what would you say about those two guys?
I think with Roberson, a lot's going to depend on this visit weekend. I know USC is making a strong push here at the end. TCU is where he's committed to. Texas certainly wants him and certainly has a spot for him. So we'll see kind of how the visit goes. I would say it's incomplete right now until, we kind of know what the pitch was from Texas. But with Deuce Robinson, I've really liked the way Texas has handled this recruitment. I just don't know if they have it finish. Like it's really hard battling Georgia for a tight end recruit,
Yeah.
given what Georgia's done at the tight end position. And it seems like Georgia's had the buzz in this recruitment for quite a while. Even without Georgia in the picture, USC was the longtime favorite for Robinson. I do think that there is an outside chance for Texas here, that when Robinson announces on signing day that it is them, but I wouldn't put odds on it right now. I would say they're probably at best 20-25%, to win it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I feel, just based off of some of the stuff I've read. Obviously, I'm not nearly as connected as you guys, but I just feel like, as you said, beating Georgia for a really top-end tight end right now, it honestly, if Steve Sarkisian can pull that off, that's a huge win. And Steve Sarkisian has had a lot of huge wins in recruiting in the last 2 years. So, but I think that one might have to go up pretty high on the list of big wins for him. So we'll see what happens with that one. Junior Day last weekend. Now, there were like 60-plus guys in, and I know HUD was covering it and taking pictures, and there was like 60,000 pictures in his update thread. So I know there were a lot of guys on campus. What are some of the names for some of the fans that may not have gotten into the 2024 class yet that showed up and talk about those guys a little bit?
Well, if you want to talk about the elites in state and nationally that were there, you have to start with Jarrett Gibson, the 5-star running back from IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. I think Texas is in a really, really strong position early on, and it's really impressive to watch what Tashard Choice is doing, coming off of winning a recruitment for a kid in Florida in Cedric Baxter, and now the number one running back in the country, also from Florida, is keeping Texas extremely high on his list. I think it just shows you what type of impact Tashard Choice has. Oh, by the way, the top 2025 running back in the country from California, Jordan Davis, was also on campus and told me afterwards that Tashard Choice was the coach he had the best relationship with out of all the schools recruiting him. So Choice definitely doing his job, keeping that backfield stocked with talent. Outside of that, Micah Hudson, one of the top receivers in the country from just down the road in Lake Belton, was also there. Came in a little bit early, but kind of through his own visit because he had an appointment that afternoon. Kobe Black, the number one corner in the state of Texas, number one player in the state of Texas for us, out of Waco Connolly, was also there. Peyton Pierce, a top linebacker from Lovejoy up in the Dallas area. So there were a ton of guys. A couple of interesting offensive linemen, including Bennett Warren, who's out of Fort Bend Christian in Houston, who is like all of 6'7", 320 apparently. He's listed at something nuts, and I asked Hudson Standish, for those who don't know, who works with me because I wasn't there, what did he look like in person? And Hudson's usually a pretty good judge because he's 6'4", and yeah, he told me he's pretty legit that size. So, I think it went well from everything. It sounded like all the feedback was really positive, and we'll see. It kind of sets the tone going into the 24 class.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that running back out of Florida. What's interesting about that, regardless of what position you're talking about, Miami's recruiting really well right now. Florida State's recruiting really well right now. Florida State's a team that a lot of people think has an outside shot at being in the playoff next year. So it's really interesting that Texas can go in there and not only keep these guys interested till the end, but get a lot of commitments from these guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do there as well. Junior Day seems a little different now under Sark. Are you very familiar with the process and kind of the schedule and what that looks like for these guys? I know with Mac Brown, we used to get, and it didn't seem like it was 60-plus guys. There'd be guys that would show up, and almost all of them would commit right then. Like, basically the class was signed up, and this is probably towards the end of Mac's tenure that this really became prevalent. But it seemed like Junior Day was just like an early signing day for Texas every year. Talk to us a little bit about what Sark's doing and how that's working on these recruits.
Yeah, we actually talked about that a little bit on our podcast last week of how different the Junior Days are under each head coach. And I think for Sark, he looks at it as an opportunity to lay groundwork for the future, right? Like, you have a really good Junior Day visit, you get them back in the spring, you get them to commit to an official visit in the summer, get them on the official and close the deal. That's kind of what seems to be the game plan for most of these guys. There isn't a heavy push for commits at this deal like there used to be. And I think if you look at what Mac Brown did, it's kind of a reason Texas is in the place it's in right now. I mean, especially late in his run, he was inviting a bunch of guys that he knew would commit on the spot if he offered them, and they may not have been the best guys, and he may not have given you room in the class to take late developers or guys that you could evaluate into the spring and summer. Like, that's going to be a big part of it. I can't tell you how many guys that we're talking about right now that were at this Junior Day that Texas is excited about, that in 3 or 4 months when they go see them in the spring, they're going to drop on their board. I mean, that's just the reality of college football recruiting.
Sure.
And under Matt, it didn't really happen a ton because, he filled up so fast. So I think it's smart to kind of take that approach. Obviously, if you can get a guy that you love and you want to take now to commit, do it. But it's not a high pressure situation. It's more of this is the starting line for this final year, and let's lay some really good groundwork so we can make sure you're back a couple times and then close the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's pros and cons to both. Obviously, you go with the Mac Brown way of doing things late there in his career at Texas, and you don't have to fight for people down the stretch. You got your guys, and then all you got to do is keep those guys in the fold. Recruiting's probably changed a little bit. Probably changed a lot, actually, since Mac was doing it here in Texas. But one of the big things, I think this is a huge piece of it's almost recruiting now, is the transfer portal. There's obviously the opportunity to bring players in from the transfer portal, but now you've got coaches that they can't just go, I got him on campus, he's going to be here for a while. The transfer portal gives a lot of players the opportunity to move on. So it's almost like you got to recruit the next class, but in the class after that, but you also have to recruit the guys that you've got there in the locker room from the year before. It's got to be really difficult for coaches. I know Texas had a lot of guys leave or enter into the transfer portal right after the season. How much of that, from a Texas perspective, do you think is player-driven versus the coaches sitting down with certain guys and just saying, honestly, here's the deal, you're not going to play here next year, or so-and-so has probably passed you on the depth chart. If you stay, you might not play that much. What does that look like today with the transfer portal?
I think there's a lot of that goes both ways. There's kids that get impatient, and we're probably in the plans in the next 2 years or so. But they just got impatient and jumped in the portal. And there's a lot of kids where they say, "Hey, this is realistically, we're not telling you have to, but this is where you are, and you're probably not going to get out of this situation. So if you want to go evaluate your options, go evaluate your options." And I think that's important, to be honest, with those type of kids, and where you see them in your program, and and give them the chance to go somewhere else. There were one or two that I think they looked at and said, "Wow, I don't think we expected that guy to leave, and he probably was in our plans." Like Jameer Johnson is a guy that I was pretty surprised went into the portal, because he played a lot, and I think with the way the defensive back position is right now, he could have seen an expanded role this year. But there was nobody that they were just totally, you know, shocked by going in.
Yeah, I agree. I think you got to be honest with these kids, because there is that opportunity now, and I think they're going about it the right way. It probably sucks to get called into the coach's office and they tell you something like that, but again, that gives you the opportunity to go look for another place to play. One of the things I think that's and I did some stats on the transfer portal in a podcast earlier this year. There is a ton of guys that go into that portal that never end up anywhere. If you follow the statistics, and I don't know how they measure all these things necessarily, but it's right around 50% of these guys won't play football at another school. So it's also kind of a gamble. I think it can be really good for players, but I also think it can be really bad for players. What are your thoughts just in general on the transfer portal so far and how it's affecting college football?
It's a rigged game, because a lot of times guys know who they want when they go in. And I think that players go in, especially guys who are highly ranked recruits that haven't played in maybe a year or two. They go in and think, well, I was a highly ranked recruit, so every school in the country is going to line up for me again. That's just frankly not what happens. You see a lot of guys from lower levels who transfer up who have proven their worthiness on the field. And so I think I always tell kids, if you're going to go in the portal, you better have a plan. You better have something laid out in advance. You better know and have assurances that you have somewhere to go, and don't. I remember I was talking to people near JD Coffee who went into the portal, and there was talk that maybe Washington or Oregon would involved, and those schools just weren't there when he went in. And he ended up at San Diego State. I'm glad JD, who I was really close with when he was in high school, got to a place so he can play. And I think he's happy to just have an opportunity anywhere. But I don't think the reality was what he thought it would be when he went in. And so it's hurting the high school recruiting a bit, because there's a lot of guys who are fringe players in high school that instead of a school taking a chance on them, they say, well, we'll just take a chance on the kid in the portal who's played the college level. It's pushing more kids down to the FCS level. And I like it personally. I'm in favor of anything that works in favor for the player over the owners, the money people in the game, the execs in the suits. I always want power to the labor. That's just kind of the way I am. But I do think it has some repercussions, and those are it.
Yeah. I said almost the exact same thing. It's really hard for coaching staffs to keep up with a guy that, maybe that player was on their radar 3 or 4 years ago when he was in high school. But if they go somewhere else, there's just too many bodies. It's too much turnover, too much churn for these guys, especially if they're at another university and they're not playing. A lot of these guys are hitting the portal because they're not playing, right? So there's really no way to evaluate where they are as a player today, where you can tangibly look at a guy in high school and say, I can see what he just did last year. Or, like you mentioned, some of the guys from the smaller schools that end up transferring up, or you've always got the superstar guys that are the grad guys that are going to go somewhere else. Everybody knows what they can do, but there's way more of those guys that are, they got recruited, they went to a certain school, things didn't work out for them, they haven't got a lot of playing time. Nobody knows who they are anymore. And I think, to me, that's the danger, like you said, of those guys jumping in the portal just willy-nilly. I think there's a lot of guys getting kind of bad advice on that. And I think, to me, I agree with you. I think there needs to be something, because coaches can just up and leave at any time. But the thing that's sad to me is these guys are they're pissing away a lot of opportunities, and there's almost no appetite anymore for, I'm just going to stay here and develop and learn. And by the time I'm a junior, it's going to be my time. And I'm going to play my junior year and maybe my senior year, and then we'll see what happens. That's almost gone anymore. And so I just wonder, it'll be interesting to see how these stats play out with that 46-50% range of guys that don't end up anywhere, and what the effect of that has on future players that are thinking about getting in the portal.
Yeah, I think that is a problem. But on the same token, there's a difference between guys who are just like, well, I don't want to stay and put in the work, and guys who are being told to leave because they're trying to make room for more recruits in the next class. It sucks because it puts them in a rock and a hard place. I always tell kids, remember, you have the leverage. They can't outright take your scholarship away from you,
Right.
So, in that case, if you're at a university, get your degree. At the very least, get your degree from there. And then if you want to go look for other options after that, but like there was a kid I knew who was going in the portal at SMU, and he was probably going to have to go down to the FCS level. And I told him, at least get the SMU degree, and then go find you an FCS school, because right now they can't deny you that degree, and that will take you a lot further, than football probably will.
Gotcha. The other big thing that's super big news this year, I think it's been big news for a couple years, but it's been absolutely nuts this year, is NIL. And I've talked about that on podcasts before, the intent versus the reality. I think the intent of NIL was for these guys to be able to say, I want to sign some pictures of myself and sell them, or I want to get some kickbacks from the school selling jerseys. If I'm in a video game, like I should get compensated for that. And those are all things I 100% agree with. If I want to sell my autograph, I should be able to do that. It's turned into a recruiting tool, and you got this whole deal with this Rashada guy at Florida, who now I'm told is not going to Florida. Like, he's just completely going someplace else. What in the world is going on with that? And what do we need to do to stop that? To me, it's a huge problem when you hear people talk about it all the time. He went there because he was going to make this much money. And my understanding of NIL is that the school can't be involved in any of that, really. And they certainly can't be involved with NIL until the guys are on campus. So how is all that stuff going down, and how do we fix it? Because that's a bad look for college football, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a little bit corrupt because you would have these boosters who could go around it. And I mean, NIL's been a reality for years now, but
sure,
now it's all above board, right? It's all above,
right?
It's all on the table. And people are always going to figure out the rules. I blame the NCAA for this because the NCAA didn't want to do anything in the first place, and they went from having a hardline stance on it to just opening the gates and saying do whatever you want with it. And it's like, well, okay, well now you can't. You're not going to be able to rein it back in. You are what you are now. You've allowed much. So again, I'm all for players getting paid for their work and making money. Getting money for people who are making money off of them. But yeah, I mean, it is something that has completely changed the game. And until somebody steps in and does something about it, it's going to have to be the NCAA or some sort of governing body. I think it's going to be this way, unfortunately.
Yeah, to me, I think it's the Wild West nature of it that's so off-putting for me. And again, I don't mind these guys making some money. There's been a lot of people making a lot of money off of what they do every Saturday for a really long time. They definitely deserve a piece of that. But what I think is the most interesting, one of the reasons, like when I was younger, I used to really enjoy watching the NFL. And then as I got older and I started to understand money more and understand business, just the way a lot of the stuff went down with the NFL and free agency, it kind of started just rubbing me the wrong way and just made it not enjoyable. And I'm starting to see more of that with college football. And I think in some cases it's worse in college football than it is in the pros because there's no contract mechanism for these guys. If they sign if this Rashada kid signed that deal with Florida, which I'm told was $13 million over 4 years, as far as I know, there's nothing to keep him in Florida for 4 years. He could have played one and decided he's gone and pocketed a fourth of $13 million for doing nothing. And to me, there's just something that's like odd about that when you start talking about college football.
Yeah, the two things I'll say is the numbers are always more astronomical report than they are in reality. And the other thing is that
Huh? Son of a bitch. We lost Mike. I think we got a lot of that stuff in with NIL. But I was going to ask him about Coach Prime, man. I know I've been talking a lot about Coach Prime all year long. Well, ever since he became the coach there at Colorado. I was going to put Mike on the spot. I know, hey, an update on Coach Prime's recruiting class. He just got the guy out of Florida, the top cornerback recruit in the country, to go on the other side of his other number one recruit and top cornerback. I think he's done some good stuff. I think where he's fallen short is on the offensive line, defensive line. We'll just have to see how that pans out. We'll talk more about Prime, and I got to do it with Mike. I got to do it with recruiting with Mike, but we will talk a little bit about that with him the next time we have him on the show. Thanks, guys. You can check all this out on YouTube. You can check it out on TikTok, Horn Takes Podcast. You can email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your questions, comments, and concerns. Welcome.